Now, clearly the message came through that not ruling out one of the policies that killed Bill Shorten in the un-losable election of 2019 wasn't playing all that well. I'll tell you what, it seems to be getting under his skin, though, because he was a bit testy doing the morning TV rounds today. Here he was with our own Peter Stefanovic this morning.
Well, we have no plans to touch or change negative gearing. What we did with our income tax changes was to deliver a tax cut for every Australian.
Yeah, but you lied doing it. You lied. You were deceptive doing that.
Guess what, Pete? Well, if I did, so did Peter Dutton, because they voted for it.
Not a happy chappy, our Albinocchio. He gave the Today Show the same treatment when he was asked about his fiscal management.
You know, and as economists have told us as well, that 2.7% rate is really just mirroring the rebates, the energy rebate that's out there, and actually the inflation rate's 3.5%.
No.
Michelle Bullock hasn't moved the rates, the interest rates because of that.
That's not right, Sarah, with respect.
The poor fella. Now, it's all good and well for him to say that there are no plans to change negative gearing, or they're not considering changing negative gearing. But we've been in exactly the same position before, of course, when it came to stage 3 tax cuts, as Stefanovic pointed out before. I mean, they said before the election that there wouldn't be any changes to them, and they kept saying it after the election. They said it all the way up to this year. But, of course, that's not what happened, is it? We later found out that the Treasurer, Jim Chalmers, had asked the Treasury to do modelling on changing the tax cuts just after the 2022 election. So here we are again. The government has commissioned the Treasury to do the modelling on changes to negative gearing, just like they did on stage 3 tax cuts, which they changed, and yet we're meant to believe that this time it's for no reason, that they're not actually going to do anything. I mean, fool me once, shame on you, and you know the rest. But the government would have to be genuinely brain dead if they are considering this in any way, and not just because Shorten did it in 2019. We have been here before. Labor banned negative gearing before. Let's go back to 1985.
Next Saturday night, we're sending you back to the future.
Thursday night, but you get the point. Paul Keating, as Treasurer, got rid of negative gearing in July 1985. Now, I know it can be difficult to get your head around what it is, but basically it's where property investors offset the losses on their property, which is the difference between rental income and what they have to spend on the place, against their other income. It's a tax write-off, like any other claim that you might make for expenses that relate to work. Keating told Cabinet all that time ago back in the 80s that the government cannot continue to tolerate a situation in which the general body of taxpayers effectively subsidises the property investments of a particular group of usually high-income taxpayers. Now, this was meant to raise $55 million in the first year, but it actually only raised $11 million because investors found other places to put their money and they claimed different tax breaks. Now, vacancy rates in Sydney and Perth went through the floor, 1% in Sydney, 1.4% in Perth, and rents went through the roof. Investors went bunter, and after the whole thing didn't work, Keating brought negative gearing back quietly in 1987, and it's been there ever since. Now, some commentators have pointed to the fact that it was only Sydney and Perth that suffered in the 80s and say that on that basis, getting rid of negative gearing would make no real difference to rental prices or rental availability. But the vacancy rates right now across the country are extremely close to what they were when negative gearing was abolished in the 80s. It's 1.6% in Sydney, 0.7% in Darwin, 1.1% in Brisbane, 0.6% in Adelaide, 1.1% in Hobart, 1.6% in Melbourne and 0.7% in Perth. The national rate has effectively been stagnant around 1.2, 1.3% since March 2022. So when the availability of rentals is that low across the country, you can't tell me that scrapping negative gearing won't hurt the rental market. And even if you are to assume that it won't drive rents up, it's all these properties in the rental market are going to stay in the rental market because we're certainly not building them fast enough to keep up with demand. So if a mum and dad investor can't afford to keep the property because it's now costing them too much money, it means that they have to sell it. And remember, we're assuming all these properties are staying in the rental market. Now, the people renting these places aren't magically going to have the money to buy them as an owner-occupier. So the only people who'll be able to buy them and keep them in the rental market are even wealthier property investors who can afford to cop the loss now in the hope they'll make it up in the property value further down the track. So Albo, the workers' champion apparently, meant to be looking after the battlers, he would force ordinary hard-working Aussies to sell their investments and effectively be redistributing wealth from the working and middle class to the rich. I mean, slow clap, buddy.